Thank you. Thank you, Vito, for that kind introduction. And I'm mindful that I hadn't realized it was 77 days, but I'm always heartened by the very first decision that we made after I became the Premier of Alberta was to sell the private airline that the government of Alberta operates, pointing out that the government should not be in the airline business, that we have companies in this country that excel at it. So, Vito, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I see many friends in the room. I have a few comments I'd like to make, and then I wanted to ensure that we had time for questions afterwards. And so it's great to be in Vancouver. I was, in fact, here for the Grey Cup, and been treated to 2 beautiful days. And as I have always said through my life, there is no place, no city in the world that is more beautiful on a sunny day than Vancouver. And so we've been treated to a couple of those. And I'm also delighted to be here with the Vancouver Board of Trade. This is the very first time since I've become the Premier of Alberta that I've left the province and given a speech and outside of Alberta. And so I'm delighted that it's here at the Board of Trade. And it's actually the only the second time since I've left that I've actually left the province. And the first was, in fact, to come here to meet with Premier Clark, and of whom I'll have more to say later. I'm mindful that I'm a politician, and I'll just begin with something that's quite humorous that I read in a book about Lincoln that I thought you would enjoy, and it was an anecdote that he would sometimes recount to people. But always mindful that he was a politician, he would tell people about the hanging that was going on in the Deep South in the United States. Back then they would hang people for horse thievery. That doesn't happen many other places in Alberta nowadays, but he recounted the story of the accused that was up on the scaffold, and the hangman put the rope around his neck, and they said, is there anything you'd like to say, any last words you'd like to say? And the fellow said, you know, I'm not in the mood. And the hangman paused for a moment. There was a murmur in the crowd, and he said again, you know, you only have a few moments. Is there anything you'd like to say? The fellow said, honestly, I'm not in the mood. And just at that moment, the local congressman pushed his way through the stand and put one foot on the step to the scaffold, and he said, would the man yield his time to me? To which the accused said, certainly, but hang me first. So it's great to be here. And I've had occasion to speak here before as Minister of Industry, and later when I served as the Vice Chairman of CIBC. And so it's an honor to be here, an honor to join you now as the Premier of Alberta to speak with you about a subject that we all have a stake in, and that is our shared future as Canadians. You may have questions about $70 oil prices. We can answer those. I'll be happy to speak about that, but the speech does not directly concern that, mercifully. So I realize this is the subject of our shared future as a country it's a perennial topic in policy forums, in government, in the news media, and of course in the proverbial coffee shops across British Columbia and Alberta. But the truth is that we do need to have this conversation because we are really at an important inflection point in this country, and that is nowhere more obvious than it is right here in British Columbia with the hard work that's going on with respect to the future of LNG. But the decisions that we reach in the near term as a country, as a society, and as a nation that can become a global trading power will determine really whether we have the ability to continue to pay for our goal of providing Canadians with the highest quality of public services. Or, on the other hand, whether everyone suffers as revenues drop, as our economic prospects narrow, and as the collective dreams that we have as a country begin to diminish. And again, I recognize that Canadians are constantly in the process of discussing these issues and deciding what our country should become. But I maintain that we are currently grappling with special circumstances in particularly as the pace of global change accelerates and as international competition intensifies. And so there are nation-building initiatives that are on the table. There are nation-building initiatives that have the potential to transform our country for the better, and certainly in the long term. But we face a limited window in which time to implement them. And I will say right up now that I believe that as a country we do possess the will to seize these opportunities. And my belief on that front stems from my personal experiences. I've had the privilege of serving Canada in a variety of roles and capacities, and seeing it from the vantage point as well of being in a senior position in the banking world in the private sector. And at our worst, I have observed a country that is sometimes divided by our history and intractable regional rivalries. But at our best, I've witnessed a nation that is reasonable, that is confident, that is lightened, and is insightful, full of people who are prepared to make the right choices, working as partners to build this country that we love and which really, if you stop and think about it, has become the envy of everyone in the world. And as Premier, I consider my responsibility to be to help overcome these divisions and evoke that same positive mindset about Canada's prospects that I know we must have and that we must share together if we're going to take advantage of the opportunities that we face. And there are certainly firm foundations to start from. We have in Canada a remarkable federal system of government, a remarkably durable and effective form of cooperation for us as a country. And it's allowed us really to unite in common cause, while preserving, I think, the unique qualities of each of our provinces and of our communities. And some of this impetus derives from an important organizing principle of the Canadian Federation, which is that it was an economic union. It's one of the core features of Confederation. Arguably, I would say, it was the core feature at the very beginning. And so economic union is really based on the assumption that the provinces can and should share the advantages of growth and of development amongst themselves, and it's based on the assumption that we are stronger together than we would be separately. And this has always really, if you stop and think about it, been vital to our sense of common Canadian nationhood. Because despite sometimes diverging interests, we are all essentially on the same team. And the strength of each part of Canada contributes to the well-being of the whole of this country. And this is the framework for understanding some of the issues that are before us. There's an E&Y document on the table that relates to the spotlight on mega projects. But my comments really are the framework for understanding Alberta's focus on some of those mega projects, nation-building projects, as I have always called them, and the collaboration that we require for collective success. And when I talk about nation-building projects, I'm speaking first and foremost, but not exclusively in the Alberta context, of pipelines. And I believe that when I last spoke here in Vancouver, I pointed out that the aspirations that British Columbia has for LNG and the aspirations or objectives that Newfoundland has for the Lower Churchill Hydro Project are similarly in the category of nation-building projects. Energy is at the heart of Canada's prosperity. I was struck years ago when I crisscrossed the country and met every premier and every environment minister on the road to Copenhagen, just how every Canadian province is in one way or another in the energy business. And one of the surest ways to sustain our prosperity is to keep energy moving from where it is produced to where it is going to be used and needed most based on free market principles. And so by now everyone is familiar with the pipeline projects of which I speak, the Trans Mountain, Gateway, Energy East, and Keystone. These are all in the nature of nation-building infrastructure because they all have powerful spin-off effects and drive growth and prosperity across the entire country. Each of these pipelines will certainly carry Western Canadian oil to other parts of Canada and on to international markets after we access Tidewater, generating jobs and revenue and investment. And I would just pause parenthetically to say that, our production of oil in this country at this point exceeds, I think, 4 million barrels per day. Alberta produces in excess of 2.5 million barrels per day, with some 2 million of that coming from Alberta's oil sands. And the logic of the numbers is really undeniable in terms of the benefits for all of us as Canadians. At present, Alberta's oil sands are directly responsible for 3% of the employment in the entire country. And rising production will lift oil sands employment by nearly 300,000 jobs, additional jobs, over the course of the next 15 years. And for every job that is a direct job in terms of the oil sands, there's an additional job directed that results from indirect association, and 1.5 jobs that result from induced association, to use the terms of economists. And so altogether, the oil sands of this country are essentially responsible for about 5% of Canada's GDP. And over the course of the next quarter of a century, the economic impact has been estimated to be in the range of $3.8 trillion, with annual capital investments, of in excess of $55 billion per year. All of this representing capital assets that are not fabricated by and large in Western Canada, but really refracted across the entire country. And I think it's important to note that there will be more than $500 billion of taxes sent to Ottawa as a result of the period of time that I'm talking about. So in practical terms, this translates into new tax revenues and royalties which Canadians urgently need, as a number of our provinces face fiscal challenges. The investments that we're speaking of are long-term in nature, and despite the ups and downs that we are currently seeing in commodity prices, these production levels will be sustained over the next 50 to 100 years. That is the scale of the resource that we're speaking about as Western Canadians. And the tax revenue and the royalties of which I speak will fund pensions and pay for the public services that Canadians use every day: schools and roads and healthcare facilities and utilities, which I cannot stress enough. And so Canada, like so many industrialized nations, must also meet the needs of our growing population of senior citizens, whose numbers are going to crest over the next 25 years as baby boomers retire. And we were just talking about this at lunch, the challenges that we're facing, that I know we're facing in Alberta. I think the same challenges are evident here in British Columbia. I spoke with Brad Wall about the very same problems that he is encountering in Saskatchewan at this point in time. We have not even yet seen the tsunami of the post-war baby boom generation hitting our healthcare system and our senior citizen care system. And we're having trouble keeping up even now. And so this is something that is massive that is approaching us. Canadian seniors will, for example, double their share of the population, and many of us in this room today will be amongst them. And we'll be counting on more continuing care beds, more responsive primary care services, and the latest in medical technology to keep pace with the pressures that we're going to be under. This is a phenomenon on a scale that no one has ever experienced before in a public health care system such as ours. Now, we can talk about innovation, and that's certainly important, but we really have to ensure that our finances in this country are strong and our economy is strong. And I think that's nowhere more appreciated than right here at the Vancouver Board of Trade. And that's why we need to actually construct the mega projects of which we're speaking about, LNG and pipelines and hydro projects, that will help provide the revenues that will be needed to fund essential public services across this country. You know, the four major proposed pipelines of which I talk are right on our doorstep. These are 21st century nation-building opportunities that will link Western Canada's energy to the Asia-Pacific basin, where we will be, if we take advantage of the opportunity, the benchmark standard for energy through the entire Asia-Pacific world. And the rewards will be brought to all of us as Canadians. But the window to secure those rewards will not stay open indefinitely. And this is true, my friends, on both the supply side as well as on the demand side. If we fail as a country to move forward with the projects of which I'm describing, sometime around 2018, 2019, maybe as late as 2020, but no later, the capacity of the existing pipeline infrastructure in this country will be exceeded. And we will be in a world where we will not be able to transport new increments of Canadian energy elsewhere in the world. And so we will start to get bottlenecks that will drive the so-called price differentials, which is essentially to say that we will no longer be able to escape continental markets, and we will be selling Canadian energy into the U.S. marketplace at deeply discounted prices. Lesser prices, not just than Brent prices, but lesser prices than are accessible even by American producers. And so it's realistic to look ahead and to say Canada's public services will feel the pain if and when we allow this to happen. In fact, all Canadians will feel the pain as and when this begins to happen. And make no mistake, if we prove unable to meet global demand, then someone else in a competitive world will gladly step forward and do it instead of us. And the developing world is seeking fresh energy supplies, and the Canadian capacity really is to be the preferred supplier if we're able to take advantage of this opportunity and build the infrastructure that we need. But from China to India to Africa, demand for energy is increasing, but so too is competitive supply. Other producers are able to service demand, whether you speak about the Atlantic Basin or the Asia-Pacific Basin. And Canada risks being shut out if we delay too long in reaching it. And this will for sure relegate us as a discounting supplier into the U.S. marketplace, a market that is already fully supplied, and leaving us essentially as a price taker as opposed to a price maker. And so in light of all that, the case for national cooperation in turning Canada into a global energy producer is imperative, and it's steadily becoming more so. And I would submit to you that the future of our prosperity as a country hinges very much on exactly this issue, whether you speak of LNG or oil in terms of our exports from this country. Now, I will not minimize the cost of increasing Canada's presence in global energy markets, because expanding energy consumption will have consequences for the planet's climate and for Canada's environment. And if we are going to be leaders in energy, we must also, as Canadians, be leaders in environmental protection. And that certainly applies to the province which I have the privilege to be the Premier of. And if we as Canadians share in the benefits of market access, we will have to share in the responsibility of mitigating the impacts of the consumption, because environmental responsibility, especially around climate change, is an important Canadian value. It is something that the citizens of this country believe in, and I know it is an important value for us as Western Canadians. Provincial differences aside, in every corner of this country, we all want to preserve our priceless natural heritage. Conservation is a fundamental value, an intrinsic value to Albertans and to British Columbians, and indeed, I think, to all Canadians. And so we recognize that the responsibilities that come from being an energy producer, and in Alberta, we want to do our part in that respect. So we've already taken steps. Ours was, in fact, the first jurisdiction in North America to actually regulate industrial greenhouse gas emissions, and amongst the very first to attach a price to industrial carbon emissions, with emitters paying into a fund which is collected by the Government of Alberta, administered independently, to invest in innovation and research to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, Alberta has, from time to time, taken heat for the program that we put in place, the $15 per ton. But I think it's important to note that certainly in British Columbia and in Saskatchewan, the models that have now been developed are modeled in part on exactly the approach that Alberta has been following for the past 10 years. We certainly know that we need to do more. In the year ahead, we will introduce a new vision for Alberta, dealing with climate change emissions, the energy, the environment, and climate change. And we will strike partnerships. We will strike new partnerships within this country, continentally and internationally, to maximize the impact of the efforts that we will be making. Greenhouse gases don't respect borders. They don't respect boundaries. Climate change is a global issue, and so no one can afford to work in isolation, least of all the government of Alberta. And as provinces, we will need to work together and with federal government to harmonize measures and to harmonize the reporting that we undertake. This provides certainty for businesses because businesses know that what's expected of them will be clearer and they can move faster to conform to the rules that are put forward, significantly speeding up compliance and reducing emissions quicker than under a patchwork of individual regimes. And cooperation also permits stakeholders. It also permits First Nations and experts to influence best practices and policies as we move forward. And so in that spirit, I have long advocated continental harmonization on environmental policies. The kind of continental harmonization we saw, including the United States as a frame of reference, the sort of emission control that we saw in the standards that I negotiated when I was Canada's Minister of the Environment on fuel emission standards for vehicles, where we have harmonized across provincial borders. These are the kind of steps that we need to take on a continental basis, not damaging our competitiveness while at the same time improving and achieving environmental outcomes. And I would say that the need to reduce emissions from industrial facilities is even more crucial. And Alberta has actually already begun this sort of intergovernmental project or work because alongside Ottawa, we have undertaken a joint monitoring regime for the oil sands. It is a distinctly transparent, a high-tech, a scientifically credible system that enables the detection and the management of cumulative effects on our province's airsheds, watersheds, and on our ecosystems. And so this is all only a start. We also must lead in another respect, and I know that is well understood in British Columbia. We must lead in the construction of durable economic partnerships with our First Nations. First Nations and other Aboriginal Canadians must be partners in the kinds of nation-building infrastructure that we are speaking about. And my views on this subject, I think, are very well known, certainly in this room, and I look forward to working with Premier Clark to define the collective future of our two provinces in this respect. The Premier and I have had excellent discussions on the best way forward. We know each other very well, we have a lot of respect for each other, and we enjoy working together. And certainly I look forward to working together with your Premier to achieve projects that serve the interests of both of our provinces and which reflect environmental standards which both of our provinces can be proud of. And First Nations in both Alberta and in British Columbia share those objectives, and they need to be our economic partners. And so we will work in that sense. Looking ahead, one of the surest methods for securing Canada's prosperity and market access that we need for all of our products is for our provinces to find common ground in dealing with energy and the environment, and to find a way to agree on rules that are well thought out, that are fair, that are clear, and that are consistent. Remembering that the aggressive pursuit of responsible energy development and the establishment of a world-class environmental regime are distinctly compatible objectives. And I have been long outspoken on this, but when we speak of energy exports from tidewater from the west coast of this country, this needs to be done in a way where we achieve the highest environmental standards in the world, second to none, starting with a blank sheet of paper to make sure that the people that live in British Columbia, on the coast of British Columbia, share that same objective and are confident in what they can expect in the future. We can be a country that excels in the development of our natural resources and in the protection and preservation of the environment. I have never seen this as a zero-sum game. It is something that is part of the distinct genius, if you will, of Canada, the capacity to develop our resources and at the same time be environmentally responsible. So this is the big picture. Reaching a consensus on energy and the environment is a key to building the brightest future for all of us as Canadians. And of course, those subjects don't define the bounds of success for Canada. There are other ways that we can live up to that constitutional principle of which I speak, the principle of economic union, if we're willing to work as well on some of the little things. And there are a lot of little things to fix. Because as our Constitution notes, and I quote, all articles of growth, produce, or manufacture of any one of the provinces shall, from and after the Union, be admitted free into each of the provinces. Now, if we're serious about securing lasting prosperity, then we have to acknowledge that the provinces fall far short of this ideal. We've done a lot of great work. The federal government deserves to be commended in terms of the work that's been done on international trade agreements. Strong provincial participation, I would submit, in the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement helped yield a very impressive outcome, one that opens the largest integrated market in the world to Canadian goods and services. And it also created, I think, a template for the way in which the provinces should be engaged in trade negotiations, a progress that has long been overdue in this country. And so I anticipate, similarly, that we will see promising results from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and from other bilateral discussions that are going on in the Asia-Pacific Basin. But even as we do this, provinces are leaving the easy stuff, the obvious solutions here at home, unfinished, because we are not fulfilling the promise of the economic union. Canada is bedeviled by arbitrary and, frankly, absurd restrictions that kill jobs and harm growth by limiting the flow of goods and services across our own Canadian borders. We raise Canadians' firms' costs of doing business by preserving a jumble of different rules and regulations in areas where the need for cooperation, frankly, should be obvious, such as inconsistencies in the allowable weights and dimensions of transport trucks across provinces. We damage competition and inflict higher prices on consumers by holding skilled professionals to differing standards of accreditation across the country, limiting their ability to provide for a fluid and efficient labor market. And while we're busy flinging open our doors to foreign enterprise, we persist in forcing companies that are registered in one province in this country to fill out bundles of paperwork if they want to operate successfully in another province in this country. It's a ridiculous state of affairs for a country that began as an economic union. And I'll tell you, in an increasingly competitive global economy, collective action is going to be indispensable. And if we want to dominate in the international marketplace, then we must build the skills and the capabilities in local markets, and we have to excel before taking on the world. We have to be able to succeed at home first and foremost. And the bigger and more competitive the local market, the better you are going to have to be to take on international competitors. The New West Partnership, I think in this context, deserves reference. It is Canada's most comprehensive domestic trade agreement, and it really is an example of what is possible. Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan represent a market of in excess of 10 million people with an annual GDP of more than $600 billion. And together we have successfully secured new markets for our products. We have cut red tape, and we've enhanced the freedom of labor movement across our three provinces. And there's clearly more for our members to do. Our difficulties in shipping last year's record grain harvests from Western Canada across the ports in British Columbia into the markets in Asia, I think stands as testimony to this. As Western Canadians, we are traders. We are good at it. It is the brightest part of our future. Exports comprise, in the case of my province of Alberta, exports comprise 1/3 of our province's economic activity. And as with energy, if we lack efficient, reliable means of moving our goods to customers, then we will falter. And it's for this reason that I recently met with my counterparts from British Columbia and Saskatchewan, as well as with more than 35 industry leaders at the New West Partnership meeting in Regina to address the challenges of moving commodities from Western Canada through port facilities in British Columbia into the Asia-Pacific Basin. Premier Clark and I share a desire to maximize our capacity to export into the growing economies of Asia. And the point which I have made before and which I would make to you again, and I think most people in this room have been to China and to Thailand and to Korea and to Japan, and you know that Alberta and British Columbia working together have a capacity to have an influence, to be a powerhouse in the Asia-Pacific Basin that is vastly disproportionate to our population. And so we have to seize that opportunity. And so we're working, Premier Clark and Premier Wall and I developed a joint submission, and we're continuing the work to identify key projects to increase international trade opportunities in all provinces, to address blockages, to improve safety, and to reduce the impacts on local communities across the West. And that's exactly the sort of cooperation that we are going to need to see. And let me tell you, Premier Clark and Premier Wall have been leaders in this, and I'm proud to be at their side as the newest, and as I sometimes say, the youngest Premier in that partnership. All three of our provinces know that we have much more opportunity working together on a pan-Canadian front, and this is something that we take a great deal of pride in. This understanding led us to communicate with the federal government recently. Many of you would have seen this, pressing for sweeping reforms of the Agreement on Internal Trade. It's our best chance to truly realize national free trade. A clear set of trade rules within Canada will level the playing field and will simplify Canadian businesses' search for capital and labor from coast to coast, and that's what we are aiming for. Our government will therefore continue to work towards a renegotiated agreement that permits the free movement of all goods and services within this country. Now, I would just say in conclusion that there are many issues that we will need to focus on if Canada is going to achieve its potential. Market access and climate change, infrastructure, free trade mobility within this country, and the role that we must search and define for First Nations and Aboriginal Canadians as our business partners. These are some of the real issues that define our possibilities as a country. They're also the opportunities that will shape our future if we grasp them together. I'm optimistic. I'm an optimist. I'm optimistic that our provincial and federal governments will do what it takes to help Canada thrive. I encounter evidence of this every time I meet with Premier Clark, with whom I have a very strong and a very focused relationship. All provinces and territories are now, I think, increasingly accepting the need for a common approach and for cooperation on the issues that I'm speaking about. And through the Council of Federation, governments have, for example, consented to the renewal of the Agreement on Internal Trade. But I would say that while this is all encouraging, we will have to close the discussions, actually execute the agreements that we speak about, and move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, Canada is the best country in the world, but nation building requires courage, it requires commitment, it requires vision, tempered by a very clear assessment of how the future is going to unfold. And it demands all that is the best in Canadians. Our love of this country and our belief that we have to leave it better than we found it. And that's why I'm so confident, because I've seen these qualities before, and on the issues that matter most to Canada, I know that we will see them again. Thank you all very much, and God bless. Thank you.
Premier Prentice, I want to thank you for what I think has been a most insightful and visionary presentation today. I think we all appreciate your focus on seizing the nation-building opportunities that are before us and your commitment to addressing the social, environmental, and economic challenges that we face as a country, and also your commitment to addressing and building strong partnerships with First Nations. So I just add my thanks to the group here today. It's indeed a pleasure to have you with us. Now, we do have a little bit of time for questions, and in your presentation, you've actually anticipated most of the questions I had prepared for you. So I'm going to ask you something a little bit different. As a young person growing up in Alberta, I was very conscious of the leadership of Premier Peter Lougheed. So I'm wondering if you can share with us what you think contemporary Canadian political leaders might learn from the legacy and the leadership of Peter Lougheed.
Well, that's a great question. Well, Peter Lougheed was a mentor of mine, and I think we all miss him. I think it was his passion for Canada, but with a full understanding that Canada is not simply one voice, that there are strong provinces and that we are stronger if each province fulfills its economic strength and is a strong society. And so, Peter Lougheed there was no prouder Albertan, but there was also no prouder Canadian. And I think that's something that we all need to come back to from time to time. This is a federation, and it's an immensely rich and exciting and wonderful country. But it is a country that is very different from one end to the other, and we know that. I think people in British Columbia know that in particular. And so this will, I'll just say this is going to be a very interesting week for me because I'm starting here in Vancouver. I saw Premier Clark yesterday. I'll be going to Quebec and meeting Premier Couillard. I'll then be going to Ontario and meeting the Premier of Ontario. And then coming back to Alberta, there's a summit of all of Alberta's First Nation leaders who I'm meeting with on Thursday and Friday. So the issues that we're talking about for me are going to be very much on display over the course of the week. And I think maybe the example of Peter Lougheed is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I have a question from Brian McConaughey, and he asks, is oil by rail a viable option for two pipelines?
Oil by rail is certainly a viable economic option to pipelines, and there are some circumstances where oil by rail is a preferable option to pipelines. But I would say in the longer term, pipelines are the most efficient way by which to deliver energy products, and I think quite clearly are also the safest way in the long term to deliver 21st century volumes of energy projects.
Okay, I have a question from Darlene Forrest with Skydance Entertainment, and Darlene asks, cancellation of government jets, could you explain the analysis of efficiency behind the decision, or was it entirely based on optics?
Based on
Optics.
Optics. It was not based on optics, although it was Executive Order Number 1 of Alberta under new management. But it was based on economics because there had been an Auditor General's report that indicated that the cost of accessing air services, because ministers and the Premier and the Lieutenant Governor need to get out across the province, that's understood, and it's extremely important that government have the capacity to reach, in the case of Alberta, rural Alberta, and the remote corners of the province. The Auditor General looked at this and felt that we could access that through charter aircraft at a cost that would be half of the cost of the government operating its own internal airline. And so that was a driving consideration in terms of making the decision. And, I was also very clear that from my perspective, I think it was a healthier situation for Alberta to evolve towards, I think, the same situation that you have in British Columbia and other provinces such as Ontario, I believe, where the government accesses air services through the private sector at lower cost, but with a similar ability to get out around the province. And so that's what the decision was based on.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. And this is from Tony Longworth. And Tony asks, you make the case for the economic tax revenue benefits of these projects. Why have corporations and governments been so unsuccessful in winning hearts and minds to these obvious benefits?
Benefits of the
pipeline projects, I assume.
I should just say, while I'm talking about politics, though, I did go to the Grey Cup yesterday, and I did have a chance after with Doug Mitchell to meet this young man. Bill Bennett will enjoy this story. Bo Levi Mitchell, who was the quarterback of the Calgary Stampeders yesterday, and there was one critical play in the game where I think he was second and had to make 20 yards, and his line broke down, and two very giant linebackers punctured through the line and chased him back another 20 yards. So he was back, and he had to throw the ball about 45 yards to get first down. And he managed to do that, sort of dodging these two giant men that were after him and waving at the same time to the receiver where he wanted him to go, and then threw this incredible pass. And so I said to him after, I said, that was pretty amazing. Like, how do you do something like that? And he said, well, you know, maybe it's a bit like politics. He said, sometimes you know you're going to get squashed, but he said, you look for the opening and you throw the ball. So. I didn't answer that question.
Yes.
But I didn't answer that question. Why have we been unsuccessful in convincing people? We've not done as good a job as we could. It's not about attributing blame. We have work to do. These are challenging issues, and in particular in the context of British Columbia, I think these are some of the most challenging and complex issues, legally, economically, of our time. And so it's going to take work on everybody's part, and I'm actually very heartened by how the debate is developing, and I think that people will have individual opinions on individual projects, but I do think that things are beginning to work in a way that we're going to start to see some significant progress. So, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you. I'll say we all look forward to working with you on those challenges as well.